When my son Marcus told me, "Just wait outside baggage claim, Pop, I'll swing by after lunch," I never imagined I'd spend the next 14 hours discovering the crushing truth about what my own flesh and blood really thought of me. 42 phone calls, a blizzard, and one overheard conversation later, I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning your downfall. What I discovered when I finally made it to his house will shake you to your core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The announcement crackled through Seattle-Tacoma International Airport speakers as I stepped off the plane from Phoenix. Welcome to Seattle, where the local time is 1:15 p.m. and the temperature is 38 degrees. I pulled my light jacket tighter around my shoulders, already feeling the Pacific Northwest chill seeping through the terminal windows. After 6 months in Arizona's desert heat, Washington's February weather hit like a slap. My carry-on bag felt heavier than usual as I made my way through the crowded terminal. Inside, carefully wrapped in layers of tissue paper, sat a vintage Rolex Submariner that had belonged to my father. 3 generations of Kellerman men had worn that watch, and now it was Marcus's turn. At 68, I figured it was time to pass down something that mattered, something that represented the legacy our family had built through decades of hard work and sacrifice. The baggage claim area hummed with typical airport energy. Families reunited with squeals of delight, business travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, and couples embraced after time apart. I found carousel number 7 and waited for my single checked bag to appear. The black leather suitcase contained 2 weeks' worth of clothes and a small wooden box holding my wife Helen's pearl earrings. Marcus had mentioned that his girlfriend Sarah might appreciate something elegant, and Helen would have wanted her jewelry to go to someone who'd treasure it. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Pac, running about 30 minutes behind. Grab your bags and wait outside the pickup area. Traffic is crazy today. M." 30 minutes seemed reasonable. Seattle traffic was notorious, and Marcus lived clear across town in Bellevue. I retrieved my suitcase when it finally circled around and made my way toward the exit, passing coffee shops and gift stores decorated with Valentine's Day displays. Hearts and flowers everywhere reminded me that Helen and I would have celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary this month if cancer hadn't taken her 2 years ago. The automatic doors whooshed open, and February air cut through my jacket like a blade. I hadn't packed for Seattle weather, having grown accustomed to Arizona's perpetual sunshine during my extended stay with my sister Ruth. The original plan had been a month-long visit to help her recover from hip surgery, but 1 month had stretched into 6 as I discovered how much I enjoyed being useful again, having purpose beyond rattling around my empty house in Spokane. Marcus had been enthusiastic when I called to arrange this visit. "Pop, you've got to see the new place. Sarah and I have been working on it for months. We've got a guest room all set up for you, and there's this amazing seafood restaurant downtown I want to take you to." His voice had carried genuine excitement, the kind I hadn't heard since he was a teenager showing off a good report card. I positioned myself near the pickup lane and checked my watch. 1:45 p.m. Marcus had said 30 minutes, which would put him here around 2:15, plenty of time to observe the constant stream of vehicles pulling up to collect passengers. A young mother struggled with 2 car seats while her husband loaded luggage. An elderly couple moved slowly but purposefully toward a waiting sedan. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going and when they'd arrive. My phone rang at 2:20. Marcus's voice came through slightly distorted by what sounded like restaurant noise in the background. "Hey, Pop, I'm really sorry, but this lunch meeting is running longer than expected. Can you hang tight for maybe another hour? I promise I'll make it up to you." "Of course, son. Business comes first." The words came automatically, the same response I'd given throughout his childhood when work demanded my attention. "Take your time." "You're the best, Pop. Love you." The line went dead before I could return the sentiment. I stared at my phone for a moment, noting the background sounds I'd heard. Clinking glasses, multiple conversations, laughter. That didn't sound like a business lunch meeting, but Marcus was 34 years old and certainly knew how to manage his own schedule. An hour stretched ahead of me. I wheeled my suitcase to a bench near the pickup area and settled in to wait. The wooden box containing Helen's earrings pressed against my ribs through my jacket pocket, a tangible reminder of why this mattered. Marcus was my only child, the sole continuation of everything Helen and I had built together. Passing down family heirlooms felt like preserving something important, creating connections that would outlast my own mortality. A security guard walked past, nodding politely as he made his rounds. The pickup lane stayed busy with a constant rotation of vehicles, but I noticed how quickly everyone moved. Cars pulled up, passengers jumped in, and within minutes they were gone. Nobody else seemed to be waiting the way I was, standing alone with luggage while time ticked by. 3:30 p.m. arrived without any word from Marcus. I tried calling, but the phone went straight to voicemail. "Marcus, it's your father. Just checking on the timing. No rush. I'm comfortable here." I kept my voice light, understanding that things come up, schedules change, and sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. A couple in their 70s walked past, the woman linking her arm through her husband's as they moved toward a waiting car. The man opened the passenger door for her, and she smiled at him with the kind of affection that comes from decades together. I thought about Helen, how she would have insisted on coming with me for this trip if she were still alive. She'd never trusted Marcus to follow through on his promises completely, always suggesting backup plans and contingencies. "He means well, but he gets distracted," she used to say. "You need to be more direct with him about what you expect." 4:15 p.m. I tried Marcus's number again. Voicemail. This time I left a more specific message. "Son, it's been 3 hours since I landed. Could you give me a call and let me know what's happening? I'm starting to get a little concerned." The temperature was dropping as afternoon moved toward evening. My light jacket, perfectly adequate for Arizona weather, offered little protection against the Pacific Northwest's damp cold that seemed to seep into bones. I walked inside the terminal briefly to warm up, then returned to the pickup area, not wanting to miss Marcus when he arrived. A text message appeared at 4:45. "Pop, really sorry. This thing is taking forever. Probably another hour or so. Thanks for being patient." Another hour? That would make it almost 6 p.m., nearly 5 hours since I'd landed. I stared at the message, reading it multiple times. No apology for the extended delay, no explanation of what this thing actually was, no suggestion that I should find alternative transportation, just an expectation that I would continue waiting indefinitely. My stomach growled, reminding me that airplane peanuts weren't a substantial meal. The terminal had plenty of food options, but I hesitated to go far from the pickup area. What if Marcus arrived while I was inside eating? What if he called and couldn't find me? The uncertainty kept me rooted in place, watching the same endless cycle of cars pulling up and driving away. 5:30 p.m. brought another attempted phone call, straight to voicemail again. "Marcus, this is getting ridiculous. I've been here for over 4 hours. Please call me back immediately." The automatic doors beside me opened and closed with mechanical regularity as travelers came and went. Each time someone approached, I looked up hopefully, thinking it might be Marcus coming to find me. Each time, strangers passed by without acknowledgement, focused on their own reunions and destinations. A young airport employee in a bright yellow vest walked by, and I considered asking for advice. But what would I say? My adult son was late picking me up? That hardly qualifies as an emergency requiring intervention. I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, just frustrated by the lack of communication and consideration. 6:15 p.m. The sky had turned dark, and the pickup area was illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in an artificial glow. Families continued their reunions around me, but the energy felt different now. People moved more quickly, eager to get home for dinner, to escape the cold, to begin their evening plans.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I tried a different approach and called Marcus's workplace. The receptionist informed me that he'd left early for a personal appointment and wouldn't be back until Monday. Personal appointment. That could mean anything. But it certainly didn't sound like a business lunch meeting that was running late. My hands were getting numb despite being buried in my jacket pockets. The wooden box with Helen's earrings had warmed from my body heat, and I found myself touching it frequently, drawing comfort from the connection to better times. Helen would have been furious by now. marching inside to find a customer service desk and demanding assistance. She never tolerated being taken for granted, never accepted poor treatment without consequences. 7 p.m. arrived with another text message. "Pop, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to push this till later tonight. Something important came up. Can you grab dinner somewhere and I'll pick you up around 9. 9 o'clock. That would make it 8 hours since I'd landed, sitting in an airport pickup area because my son couldn't be bothered to honor his commitments. I read the message 3 times, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not just frustration anymore, but genuine hurt mixed with growing anger. I called him immediately. Voicemail. "Marcus, this is unacceptable. I'm 68 years old, I've been standing in the cold for 6 hours, and you keep pushing back our meeting time without any real explanation. I want to know exactly what's so important that you can leave your father stranded at an airport." The food court inside the terminal offered warmth and a chance to sit down properly for the first time in hours. I ordered a sandwich and coffee, choosing a table where I could see the pickup area through the windows. The hot coffee burned my cold hands as I wrapped them around the cup, grateful for any source of warmth. Other diners chatted quietly around me, most of them travelers grabbing quick meals between flights. I sat alone with my phone, checking it every few minutes for messages that didn't come. The sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I forced myself to eat, knowing I needed energy for whatever this evening would bring. 8:30 p.m. I was back outside, having spent an hour warming up and gathering my resolve. Whatever was keeping Marcus busy, he was going to explain it properly when he finally arrived. This level of inconsideration demanded confrontation, and I was prepared to have that conversation. My phone rang at exactly 9 p.m. Marcus's voice sounded different, more rushed than before. "Pop, I'm really sorry, but tonight just isn't going to work out. Why don't you grab a hotel room and we'll connect first thing tomorrow morning? I'll pay for everything, of course." Absolutely not. The words came out harder than I'd intended. "You told me to wait here, and I've been waiting for 8 hours. I'm not spending money on a hotel room because you can't keep your word. Pop, please don't be difficult about this. Things happen, you know how it is." "No, Marcus, I don't know how it is. I flew here specifically to see you, at your invitation, and you've left me sitting in an airport all day without any reasonable explanation." Silence stretched across the phone line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, sharp and irritated. "Look, I'll come get you, but you need to understand that this isn't how I plan to spend my evening. It's not how I plan to spend mine either. Fine, give me 30 minutes. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in the fluorescent glare of the pickup area lights. Not how he'd planned to spend his evening, as if picking up his father from the airport was some enormous inconvenience rather than a basic courtesy between family members. 9:45 p.m. I stood with my suitcase and carry-on bag, surrounded by the detritus of 8 hours in the same location. Coffee cups, food wrappers, and the accumulated frustration of a day that had gone completely wrong. Other travelers moved efficiently around me, everyone except me knowing exactly where they were going and when they'd arrive. At 10:15, a familiar silver Honda pulled into the pickup lane. Marcus stepped out, moving with quick, efficient motions that suggested he wanted this interaction to be as brief as possible. He looked good, professionally dressed in dark slacks and a button-down shirt, but his expression carried none of the warmth I'd expected from our reunion. "Hey, Pop." He grabbed my suitcase without ceremony and loaded it into his trunk. "Sorry about the wait." I studied his face as I climbed into the passenger seat. No signs of stress or exhaustion that would suggest he'd been dealing with some legitimate emergency. His clothes weren't wrinkled, his hair was perfectly styled, and he smelled like cologne mixed with something else. Wine, maybe, or beer? "So what was the crisis that kept you busy for 8 hours?" I asked as we pulled away from the airport. Marcus focused intently on the traffic ahead of us. "Work stuff. You know how it is in sales. Everything's always urgent." "I called your office. They said you left early for a personal appointment." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. It was work-related, but not officially work, if you know what I mean. Client relationships, networking, that kind of thing. I didn't know what he meant, but something in his tone suggested I shouldn't push for details. We drove in silence through Seattle's evening traffic, passing restaurants and shopping centers that glowed with warm light. Through the windows, I could see families enjoying dinner together, couples sharing quiet conversations, the normal rhythms of people who kept their commitments to each other. "How's Sarah?" I asked, trying to shift to safer conversational ground. "She's good. She's actually visiting her sister in Portland this weekend, so you won't get to meet her on this trip." Another piece of information that didn't match what Marcus had told me when we'd planned this visit. He'd specifically mentioned wanting me to meet Sarah, showing off the guest room they'd prepared, going to that seafood restaurant together. Now, suddenly she was out of town, and our elaborate plans had condensed into a grudging pickup after 8 hours of waiting. The wooden box in my pocket pressed against my ribs as we took a turn toward Bellevue. Helen's earrings, meant for a girlfriend who wasn't even in town. The vintage Rolex in my carry-on bag, intended as a gesture of love and continuity for a son who considered spending 30 minutes collecting his father from the airport to be an evening-ruining inconvenience. Marcus's house, when we finally arrived, was impressive. A modern 2-story structure in a neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly maintained and every driveway held expensive cars. The kind of place that suggested financial success and careful attention to appearances. I'd helped with the down payment, contributing $20,000 from Helen's life insurance money because Marcus had been struggling to qualify for the mortgage on his sales income alone. "Nice place," I said as we pulled into the driveway. "Thanks, we've put a lot of work into it." Inside, the house was even more impressive. Hardwood floors, granite countertops, furniture that looked like it had been selected by a professional designer. Everything coordinated, everything expensive, everything perfect, except for the atmosphere of reluctant hospitality that hung in the air like smoke. "The guest room is upstairs," Marcus said, carrying my suitcase toward a staircase that was probably worth more than most people's cars. "Bathroom's right across the hall. You should have everything you need." I followed him upstairs, noting the family photos lining the hallway walls. Marcus and Sarah at various social events, Marcus receiving some kind of sales award, Marcus and Sarah on vacation in what looked like Hawaii. Lots of pictures of their life together, but none that included me. Not even the photo from Marcus's college graduation, where I'd stood proudly beside him in his cap and gown. The guest room was beautiful, decorated in neutral colors, with a queen-sized bed and a sitting area near the window. It looked like a hotel room, professionally appointed, but lacking any personal touches that would suggest family lived here. "I'll let you get settled," Marcus said, setting my suitcase on a luggage rack. "I've got some things to take care of tonight, but we'll catch up tomorrow." "What kind of things?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Marcus paused in the doorway, his expression shifting to something I couldn't quite read. "Just things, Pop. I'll see you in the morning." He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt final. I stood alone in the beautiful guest room, surrounded by expensive furniture and tasteful decorations, feeling more isolated than I had during 8 hours in an airport pickup area. Through the window, I could see into the backyard, where outdoor lighting illuminated a carefully landscaped patio. Marcus appeared below, walking toward a hot tub where steam rose into the cold night air. He was carrying 2 wine glasses and a bottle, moving with the casual confidence of someone who was exactly where he wanted to be. A woman emerged from the hot tub as Marcus approached. Not Sarah, whose photo I'd seen throughout the house, but someone else entirely. Someone with dark hair while Sarah was blonde. Someone shorter while Sarah was tall. Someone who laughed and took one of the wine glasses from Marcus's hand before kissing him with obvious familiarity. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding with the realization of what I'd just witnessed. Marcus hadn't been dealing with work crises or client emergencies. He'd been with another woman while his father sat in an airport for 8 hours. And now he was continuing that evening as if nothing had happened. The wooden box in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. Helen's earrings, meant for a girlfriend who was supposedly out of town while Marcus entertained someone else entirely. The vintage Rolex in my carry-on bag, intended as a gesture of love for a son who thought so little of his father that he'd risk being discovered in his infidelity rather than interrupt his personal time. I sat heavily on the edge of the queen-sized bed, staring at the closed door and trying to process what this day had revealed about my relationship with my only child. 8 hours of waiting, a reluctant pickup, and now the discovery that everything Marcus had told me about this weekend was a lie designed to accommodate his affair. The house around me felt different now, not impressive but hollow, like a beautiful stage set hiding ugly realities. I thought about Helen, how she would have handled discovering this kind of deception. She would have confronted it immediately, demanded honesty, and refused to enable behavior that violated her sense of right and wrong. Outside, I could hear laughter from the hot tub, the sound of two people enjoying themselves without any concern for the collateral damage their actions might cause. Marcus had chosen this over spending time with his father, had left me stranded at an airport so he could continue an affair in the house I'd helped him buy. The realization settled over me like cold water, washing away the last remnants of the warm reunion I'd imagined during my flight from Phoenix. This visit wasn't going to be about family connections or passing down heirlooms or building bridges between generations. It was going to be about confronting truths I'd been avoiding and making decisions I'd been postponing. I pulled out my phone and stared at Marcus's contact information. 42 attempted calls throughout the day, all ignored while he prioritized his affair over his father's well-being. The numbers told a story more clearly than any words could, a mathematical proof of where I ranked in my son's priorities. Tomorrow would bring conversations I wasn't sure I was ready to have, but tonight I was alone in a guest room that felt more like a prison, listening to my son celebrate infidelity in the backyard below while I tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. The wooden box pressed against my ribs as I lay back on the expensive pillows, and I wondered if Helen's earrings would ever find their way to someone who deserved them, or if they'd remain in their tissue paper wrapping, another symbol of misplaced love and misguided generosity. Sleep felt impossible, but morning would come eventually, and with it would come reckonings I could no longer postpone. Morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that seemed to seep through windows and into bones. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling while sounds from the backyard below filtered through the guest room walls. Laughter, splashing, the clink of wine glasses, and eventually the soft closing of the back door around 2 a.m. My son entertaining his mistress while his father lay awake in the room above, processing the magnitude of yesterday's betrayal. By 7 a.m., I was dressed and sitting in the guest room's reading chair, watching the neighborhood come alive through rain-streaked windows. Professional couples emerged from identical houses, climbing into expensive cars for their morning commutes. Children waited at bus stops under colorful umbrellas. Normal families following normal routines, untouched by the kind of deception that had poisoned my reunion with Marcus. The house remained silent around me. No sounds of movement from Marcus's bedroom down the hall, no coffee brewing in the kitchen, no acknowledgement that a guest was awake and might appreciate some basic hospitality. I checked my phone repeatedly, hoping for a text message or missed call that might offer some explanation for yesterday's treatment, but my screen remained blank. At 8:30, I ventured downstairs, hoping to find coffee or at least determine whether Marcus was awake. The kitchen looked like a magazine photograph, all granite and stainless steel and perfectly arranged accessories. But it also looked completely unused, as if no one actually lived here or cooked meals or shared morning conversations over breakfast. I found coffee pods in a cabinet and figured out how to operate Marcus's expensive espresso machine. The coffee was excellent, probably more expensive per cup than most people spent on lunch, but it tasted bitter in my mouth as I stood alone in the pristine kitchen, listening to the rain against windows and wondering how long Marcus planned to avoid me. A newspaper lay folded on the granite island, still in its plastic delivery sleeve. The Seattle-Times, delivered but unread, adding to the impression that this house was more showpiece than home. I pulled out the business section and tried to distract myself with stock reports and economic forecasts, anything to avoid thinking about what I'd witnessed in the backyard. 9 a.m. came and went without any signs of life from upstairs. I walked through the house, examining the artwork and furniture that represented thousands of dollars of careful selection. Everything coordinated, everything expensive, everything designed to impress visitors and project success. But nowhere did I see evidence of the Marcus I'd raised, the boy who'd collected baseball cards and built model airplanes and dreamed of becoming an astronaut. The living room mantelpiece held several framed photographs, and I studied them carefully in the morning light. Marcus and Sarah at what looked like corporate events, both of them smiling professionally at cameras. Marcus receiving sales awards, shaking hands with men in expensive suits. Marcus and Sarah on vacation, posed against tropical backgrounds with the kind of forced enthusiasm that suggested these trips were more about appearances than enjoyment. But no family photos. No pictures from Marcus's childhood, no images of him with Helen or me, no evidence that he'd existed before his current life of professional success and carefully curated experiences. It was as if his history had been erased, replaced entirely by this new identity as a successful salesman living in an expensive house with a woman who apparently wasn't even exclusive to him. A door opened upstairs, followed by the sound of a shower running. Marcus was finally awake, beginning his day more than 12 hours after abandoning his father at an airport. I returned to the kitchen and refilled my coffee cup, preparing for whatever conversation would follow when he eventually made his appearance. The shower ran for 20 minutes, followed by the drone of a hairdryer and more sounds of extensive preparation. Marcus clearly wasn't rushing to reconnect with his father, taking his time with grooming routines that suggested he had somewhere important to be today. When he finally appeared in the kitchen at 10:15, Marcus looked every inch the successful professional. Tailored pants, pressed shirt, expensive watch that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His hair was perfectly styled, his face cleanly shaven, and he moved with the confident efficiency of someone completely comfortable in his expensive surroundings. "Morning, Pop." He grabbed a coffee pod and went through the same machine routine I'd figured out earlier. "Sleep okay?" "Not particularly." I watched him carefully, looking for any signs of guilt or discomfort about yesterday's treatment. It was a long day. Marcus focused intently on his coffee preparation, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, sorry about that. Sometimes work gets crazy, you know how it is. I called your office yesterday. They said you'd left early for a personal appointment." His hand paused briefly on the espresso machine handle, the only indication he'd heard my statement. "Work-related personal appointment, client relationship stuff." "With the woman in your hot tub last night?" The coffee cup slipped from Marcus's hand, hitting the granite counter with a sharp crack. Dark liquid spread across the expensive surface, pooling around the base of the espresso machine. He stared at the mess for several seconds before grabbing paper towels and beginning to clean up with jerky mechanical movements. "I don't know what you think you saw," he said without looking up from the spilled coffee. "I saw you with a woman who wasn't Sarah. I saw you serving wine and acting very familiar with someone who clearly wasn't your girlfriend who's supposedly visiting her sister in Portland." Marcus finished cleaning the counter and threw the paper towels away with more force than necessary. When he finally looked at me, his expression had shifted from avoidance to something closer to defiance. "Look, Pop, my personal life is complicated right now. Sarah and I are having some issues, and sometimes I need to blow off steam. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "You left me stranded at an airport so you could entertain another woman in the house I helped you buy. You helped with the down payment. That doesn't give you ownership of my personal decisions." The casual dismissal of my financial contribution stung almost as much as the abandonment at the airport. $20,000 from Helen's life insurance, money we'd saved for decades, reduced to "helped with the down payment," as if it were pocket change rather than a significant sacrifice. "So this is how you repay that help? By lying to me and treating me like an inconvenience?" Marcus poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I didn't lie to you. I told you I had things to deal with yesterday, and I did. My personal relationships are things. I honor my commitments to the people who matter." The phrase hung in the air between us like smoke. The people who matter. Apparently, I didn't qualify for that category, despite 34 years of putting Marcus's needs ahead of my own, despite working overtime to pay for his college education, despite contributing my wife's life insurance money to help him achieve homeownership. I see. I set my coffee cup down carefully, the ceramic making a soft clink against the granite. So, I don't matter enough for you to pick me up from the airport on time, but your affair partner matters enough to keep me waiting for 8 hours? It's not an affair. Sarah and I aren't exclusive right now. Does Sarah know that? Marcus's jaw tightened. Sarah knows exactly what our arrangement is. We're working through some things, and part of that involves seeing other people temporarily. Is that why she's visiting her sister in Portland? To get away from your arrangement? Sarah is in Portland because she wanted to visit her sister. Everything isn't about you, Pop. The dismissive tone sparked something angry in my chest. Everything wasn't about me, but apparently nothing was about me either. Not my comfort, not my feelings, not my need to be treated with basic human decency by my own son. You're right, I said quietly. Clearly, nothing is about me, especially not your concern for my well-being or your respect for my time. Marcus checked his expensive watch, a gesture so casual and dismissive that it felt like a slap. Look, I've got appointments today, but we can grab dinner tonight and talk more then. There's this great steakhouse downtown that I think you'd enjoy. Assuming no client emergencies come up. That's not fair. Yesterday was unusual. Yesterday was deliberate, Marcus. You chose to ignore 42 phone calls from your father so you could spend time with another woman. That wasn't an emergency or an oversight. That was a choice that revealed exactly how little I mean to you. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he didn't want to face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, cold and calculating. Maybe we should talk about why you're really here, Pop. I'm here because you invited me, because you said you wanted to spend time together and show me your new house. Are you sure that's all? Something in his voice made my stomach clench. What else would there be? Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, his posture shifting from defensive to almost predatory. Ruth called me last month. She's worried about you living alone in that big house in Spokane. She thinks you're getting too old to manage everything by yourself. The mention of my sister's name in this context felt like betrayal. Ruth had been concerned about me since Helen's death, encouraging me to consider assisted living or moving closer to family. But I'd never imagined she'd contacted Marcus directly to discuss my living situation. Ruth had no business calling you about my personal affairs. She's worried about you. We're all worried about you. That house is too big for one person, and you're not getting any younger. I'm 68, not 98. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Marcus set down his coffee cup and fixed me with a stare that reminded me uncomfortably of his mother when she was determined to win an argument. Are you? Because Ruth says you've been struggling with basic maintenance, that you've let things slide since Mom died. Ruth exaggerates. The house is fine. She says the gutters are falling off and the roof leaks in 3 places. She says you haven't done yard work in months and the neighbors are starting to complain. Each criticism hit like a physical blow, partly because they contained grains of truth I'd been avoiding. The house had been too much for me since Helen's death, too full of memories and too demanding of energy I no longer possessed. But acknowledging that felt like admitting defeat, like giving up on the independence I'd fought to maintain. The house just needs some minor repairs, nothing I can't handle. Pop, be realistic. You're living in a 4-bedroom house that's falling apart, rattling around by yourself, probably not eating properly or taking care of your health. It's not sustainable. So what are you suggesting? Marcus straightened up, his expression shifting to something more businesslike. There are some great senior communities around here. Independent living places where you'd have your own apartment, but access to meals and activities and medical care when you need it. You want to put me in a nursing home. Not a nursing home, independent living. You'd have your own space, but you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep and all the things that are getting harder for you to manage. The conversation was moving in a direction I hadn't anticipated, but suddenly everything made more sense. The reluctant pickup, the dismissive treatment, the casual disregard for my feelings. Marcus wasn't seeing me as his father anymore. He was seeing me as a problem to be solved, an elderly relative who needed to be managed rather than loved. And what happens to my house? You'd sell it, obviously, use the money to pay for the assisted living, and maybe have some left over for other things. Other things, like helping you with your mortgage payments? Marcus's face flushed slightly. I never said anything about money. This is about your safety and well-being. Is it? Or is it about getting your hands on my assets while I'm still alive to sign them over? That's a terrible thing to say. I'm trying to help you. You're trying to help yourself. You want me out of the way, and you want access to my money, and you've convinced yourself that it's for my own good. The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of expensive appliances and the sound of rain against windows. Marcus stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part anger and part something else. Calculation, maybe? Or the look of someone whose carefully laid plans had just been exposed. I think you're being paranoid, he said finally. Nobody's trying to take advantage of you. We just want to make sure you're safe and cared for. We? Who exactly is we? Ruth and me. Sarah's been supportive too. She works in healthcare, so she understands the challenges that older people face living alone. Sarah, the girlfriend who was supposedly out of town, but whose opinion somehow matters in decisions about my future. Sarah, who worked in healthcare and therefore qualified as an expert on what was best for a man she'd never met. I see. So you've all been discussing my living situation and making plans for my future without bothering to include me in the conversation? We didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. We thought it would be better to research options first and then present you with solutions. Solutions to a problem I didn't know I had. Marcus checked his watch again, a gesture that had become his signature move for avoiding difficult conversations. Look, we don't have to decide anything today. Why don't you think about it while you're here? Tour some facilities, see what's available. You might be surprised by how nice some of these places are. I'm not touring nursing homes, Marcus. Senior communities.
And you should at least look at them before you dismiss the idea completely. I'm dismissing the idea completely because I don't need senior housing. I need a son who treats me with respect and doesn't abandon me at airports. You're making this about yesterday again. I apologized for that. You didn't apologize. You made excuses and blamed work commitments that turned out to be lies. Marcus pushed away from the counter, his patience clearly exhausted. I have to get to the office. We'll continue this conversation tonight. Will we? Or will another emergency come up that requires you to ignore your father? I'll be home by 6. We'll go to dinner and talk like adults. He moved toward the hallway, clearly intending to end the conversation, but I wasn't finished. The wooden box in my pocket pressed against my ribs, and I suddenly remembered why I'd come to Seattle in the first place. Marcus, wait. He paused in the doorway, impatience radiating from every line of his body. I brought you something. I pulled out the wooden box and set it on the granite counter. These were your mother's favorite earrings. I thought Sarah might like to have them. Marcus glanced at the box without interest. That's nice, Pop, but Sarah's not really into vintage jewelry. Maybe you should keep them. They're worth about $3,000. His attention sharpened immediately. $3,000 for earrings? They're cultured pearls with diamond settings. Your great-grandmother bought them in San Francisco in 1952. Your mother wore them to our wedding. Marcus picked up the box and opened it, studying the earrings with the kind of focused attention he hadn't shown me since I'd arrived. They're pretty nice. Sarah might appreciate them after all. I also brought you this. I reached into my carry-on bag and pulled out the vintage Rolex, still in its original box. It belonged to your grandfather, then to me. I thought it was time to pass it down. Marcus set down the pearl earrings and took the watch box with obvious interest. The Rolex gleamed against its velvet lining, 40 years of careful maintenance evident in its pristine condition. This is a Submariner, right? What year? 1984. Your grandfather bought it when he retired from Boeing. It's worth about $12,000 now, maybe more. Marcus lifted the watch from its box and examined it closely, turning it over to read the inscription on the back. To William Kellerman, 30 years of dedicated service. His fingers traced the engraved words with something approaching reverence. I had planned to give these to you properly, over dinner, with some explanation of their family history. But given how this visit has gone, I thought I should present them now before any more emergencies come up. Marcus fastened the watch around his wrist, admiring the way it looked against his expensive shirt cuff. It fits perfectly. Thank you, Pop. This is really generous. Your mother would have wanted Sarah to have the earrings, and your grandfather would have been proud to see you wearing his watch. I'll take good care of both of them. He was still examining the watch when his phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus glanced at the screen, and his expression changed immediately. I really do have to run. We'll talk more tonight, I promise. Another client emergency? Something like that. He grabbed his keys from the counter and headed toward the garage, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the empty jewelry boxes and the bitter taste of a conversation that had revealed more about my son's character than I'd wanted to know. Through the kitchen window, I watched Marcus's BMW pull out of the driveway and disappear down the tree-lined street. He was wearing his grandfather's watch and carrying his mother's earrings, but I doubted he was thinking about family history or legacy or the love that had motivated my gifts. The house settled into silence around me, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing realization that this visit was revealing truths I'd been avoiding for years. Marcus didn't see me as his father anymore. He saw me as an elderly relative who needed to be managed, whose assets needed to be secured, whose inconvenient presence needed to be minimized. I picked up the empty jewelry boxes and carried them back to the guest room, where they joined my suitcase as evidence of misplaced generosity. The wooden box that had Helen's earrings felt impossibly light now, emptied of both its contents and its sentimental value. From the guest room window, I could see the backyard where Marcus had entertained his mistress while I lay awake upstairs. The hot tub was covered now, innocent-looking in the gray morning light, but I couldn't forget the sounds of laughter and intimacy that had drifted through the rain-soaked air. My phone showed 11:30. Marcus wouldn't return until 6, leaving me with more than 6 hours to fill in this house that felt more like a museum than a home. I could explore the neighborhood, find a coffee shop or bookstore, discover what Bellevue had to offer a visiting father whose son was too busy to spend time with him. Or I could do something else entirely, something that would force Marcus to confront the consequences of treating his father like an inconvenience while simultaneously planning to benefit from his death. I sat down in the guest room's reading chair and pulled out my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Ruth answered on the second ring, her voice warm with genuine pleasure at hearing from me. "William, how's your visit with Marcus going? Are you having a wonderful time?" "It's been enlightening," I said carefully. "Ruth, I need to ask you something. Did you call Marcus last month to discuss my living situation?" Silence stretched across the phone line, followed by a sigh that told me everything I needed to know. "I was worried about you, William. You've seemed so lost since Helen died, and that house is becoming too much for you to manage alone. So you took it upon yourself to contact my son and discuss putting me in assisted living?" "Not assisted living, independent senior housing. There are some lovely places where you'd have your own apartment, but access to meals and social activities. You're too young to just waste away in that big empty house." "Did it occur to you to discuss this with me before involving Marcus?" "I knew you'd resist the idea. You're stubborn, William, just like your father was. Sometimes family has to make difficult decisions for people we love." "And did Marcus seem receptive to your concerns?" Another pause. "He was very interested in helping you find the right solution. He even asked me to research facilities in the Seattle area so you could be closer to him. I'm sure he did. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that explained everything about this visit. Marcus hadn't invited me to Seattle for a family reunion. He'd invited me to pressure me into selling my house and moving into senior housing where he could monitor my finances and ensure his inheritance remained intact. Ruth, I need you to understand something. I don't need senior housing. I need family members who respect my autonomy and don't make plans for my future behind my back. William, please don't be angry with me. I was only trying to help. I know you were, but your help has created a situation that's quite painful for me. What do you mean? I looked around the expensive guest room, thinking about Marcus's casual dismissal of my feelings and his obvious interest in my jewelry's monetary value rather than its sentimental significance. I mean that I'm discovering some uncomfortable truths about what I mean to the people I love most. Oh, William, I'm sorry if I've caused problems between you and Marcus.
That was never my intention. I know it wasn't. But sometimes good intentions create bad consequences. After I hung up with Ruth, I sat in the reading chair and stared out at the gray Seattle sky, processing the full scope of what had been planned for me. A coordinated effort between my sister and my son to convince me that I was incapable of independent living, that my house was a burden rather than a home, that my best option was to surrender my autonomy and place myself under their well-meaning control. The vintage Rolex was gone from my carry-on bag, now adorning Marcus's wrist as he went about his business day. Helen's pearl earrings were gone too, probably destined for a girlfriend who would appreciate their monetary value while remaining ignorant of their family history. But I still had options. I still had choices that Marcus and Ruth hadn't anticipated, decisions that would force them to confront the consequences of treating me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. I pulled out my phone again and began searching for attorneys' offices in Seattle. It was time to make some changes to my will, and I wanted to do it while the memory of yesterday's abandonment and this morning's manipulation were still fresh in my mind. The rain continued to fall against the guest room windows as I made my calls, each conversation bringing me closer to a decision that would reshape my family's future in ways they couldn't imagine. Marcus thought he could manage me like one of his sales prospects, applying pressure and manipulation to achieve his desired outcome. He was about to discover that his elderly father still had some surprises left in him. The law office of Harrison and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, with windows that offered sweeping views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. I'd taken a taxi there at 2 p.m., leaving Marcus's house with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The receptionist, a professional woman in her 40s, had managed to fit me in for an emergency consultation after I'd explained that I needed to make immediate changes to my estate planning. James Harrison himself was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd handled plenty of family crises over his decades of practice. His office was appointed with dark wood furniture and legal tomes that spoke of experience and competence. Mr. Kellerman, thank you for coming in on such short notice. I understand you need to make some revisions to your will? Complete revisions, I corrected, settling into the leather chair across from his massive desk. I need to change everything. Harrison opened a legal pad and picked up an expensive pen. Why don't you tell me about your current situation, and then we can discuss what changes you'd like to make. I spent 20 minutes explaining my circumstances. The house in Spokane, my relationship with Marcus, yesterday's abandonment at the airport, this morning's revelation about the coordinated plan to pressure me into senior housing. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression remaining professionally neutral throughout my account. I see, he said when I'd finished. And your current will leaves everything to your son Marcus? Everything. The house, my investment accounts, my life insurance policy, everything. I've accumulated over 45 years of marriage and 30 years of running my own business. What's the approximate value of your estate? The house is worth about $400,000.
Investment accounts total roughly $600,000. Life insurance is another $200,000, so about $1.2 million total. Harrison made a note on his pad. That's a substantial inheritance. And you want to change the beneficiary because of recent events? I want to change it because I've discovered that my son sees me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a father to love. He's treating my death as a business opportunity while simultaneously trying to manipulate me into giving up my independence. Estate planning decisions shouldn't be made in anger, Mr. Kellerman. Have you considered that your son might genuinely be concerned about your welfare? If he were genuinely concerned about my welfare, he wouldn't have left me stranded at an airport for 8 hours while he entertained his mistress. If he were genuinely concerned about my welfare, he would have discussed housing options with me directly instead of conspiring with my sister behind my back. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. What kind of changes are you considering? I want to establish a charitable trust. Something that will ensure my money goes to organizations that actually help people, instead of funding my son's lifestyle and infidelity. Any particular charities you have in mind? I'd been thinking about this during the taxi ride downtown. The American Cancer Society, in memory of my wife, and maybe something for seniors who are genuinely in need of assistance, not privileged adults who want to warehouse their parents for convenience. We can certainly establish a charitable trust with those organizations as beneficiaries. What about your son? Do you want to leave him anything at all? $1. I want it legally clear that I didn't forget about him. I want him to understand that his inheritance was a choice I made, not an oversight. Harrison set down his pen and studied me carefully. Mr. Kellerman, I have to ask this. Are you making these decisions under any kind of duress or pressure? Has anyone threatened you or coerced you in any way? The only pressure I'm under is the pressure of discovering who my son really is. No one has threatened me. I'm making these decisions with complete mental clarity and full understanding of their consequences. I'm required to assess your mental competence for any major estate planning changes. Would you be willing to answer some questions that will establish your cognitive state for our records? For the next 10 minutes, Harrison guided me through a series of questions designed to demonstrate mental acuity. He asked me to recall dates, perform simple calculations, explain my reasoning for the changes, and demonstrate understanding of their implications. I answered everything correctly, feeling oddly vindicated by the process. You're clearly competent to make these decisions, Harrison concluded. I can have the new will drafted by tomorrow morning if you'd like to proceed. I'd like to proceed immediately. There is one thing you should consider. If you're serious about these changes, you might want to think about how to communicate them to your family. Surprises in estate planning often lead to lengthy court battles. I'm not planning to surprise anyone. I'm planning to tell Marcus exactly what I've done and why I've done it. When? Tonight. He's promised to take me to dinner, assuming no emergencies come up. Harrison smiled slightly. Would you like me to prepare a letter explaining the changes? Something you could give him that would outline your reasoning in legal terms? That's an excellent idea. We spent another hour working through the details. The charitable trust would be funded with the bulk of my estate, managed by the law firm and distributed annually to cancer research and senior assistance programs. Marcus would receive $1 and a letter explaining that his inheritance had been forfeited due to his treatment of his father and his attempts to manipulate me into surrendering my independence. By 4 p.m., I was back in a taxi heading toward Bellevue, carrying copies of documents that would reshape my family's financial future in ways they couldn't imagine. The rain had stopped, and late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting everything in golden light that made Seattle look almost magical. I used the taxi ride to call a real estate agent in Spokane. If Marcus and Ruth were so concerned about my ability to maintain my house, I'd remove that concern by selling it myself and moving somewhere that better suited my actual needs and desires. Mr. Kellerman, I'd be happy to help you sell your home. Have you found another place to live? I'm considering relocating to Arizona. I spent 6 months there recently and found the climate much more agreeable than Washington winters. Arizona is wonderful for retirees. Much lower cost of living, too. Your house should sell quickly in the current market. When would you like to list it? As soon as possible. I'll be returning to Spokane tomorrow, and I'd like to move forward immediately. By the time the taxi pulled into Marcus's driveway, I'd set wheels in motion that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my remaining years. The house would be sold, the proceeds would fund my relocation to Arizona, and Marcus would discover that his inheritance plans had evaporated along with his father's patience. The BMW was in the driveway when I arrived, suggesting that Marcus had kept his promise to be home by 6. Through the living room windows, I could see him moving around inside, presumably preparing for our dinner engagement. I let myself in through the front door, noting that Marcus had changed clothes since this morning. Gone was the professional attire, replaced by casual slacks and a polo shirt. He was wearing the vintage Rolex, I noticed, and the sight of my father's watch on his ungrateful wrist sparked a fresh wave of anger. "Pop, there you are. I was starting to wonder where you'd gone. I had some business to take care of downtown."
Business? What kind of business? Legal matters. Nothing that concerns you. Marcus looked puzzled but didn't press for details. Are you ready for dinner? I made reservations at that steakhouse I mentioned, 7 o'clock. Before we go anywhere, I need to have a conversation with you. Something in my tone must have alerted him to the seriousness of the situation. Marcus's casual demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. What kind of conversation? The kind where I tell you exactly what I think of your behavior and what consequences it's going to have. Pop, if this is still about yesterday, I told you I was sorry. You told me you had work emergencies. You told me Sarah was out of town. You told me a lot of things that turned out to be lies designed to cover up the fact that you were more interested in entertaining your mistress than treating your father with basic respect. Marcus glanced around nervously, as if checking to make sure we were alone. Look, my personal life is complicated right now, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you, doesn't it? Because your actions suggest otherwise. Let me tell you what your actions tell me, Marcus. They tell me that you see me as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a father to be loved. They tell me that you're more interested in my money than my company. They tell me that you've been conspiring with Ruth to pressure me into giving up my independence so you control my assets. That's not true. We're concerned about your safety. Are you? Or are you concerned about ensuring your inheritance remains intact? Marcus's face flushed. I've never asked you for money. You didn't have to ask. You just accepted $20,000 for your down payment and assumed the rest would follow when I died. You offered that money freely. I offered it out of love for a son I thought appreciated my sacrifices. Now I'm discovering that you've been taking my generosity for granted while planning my future without my consent. We haven't planned anything. We've discussed options. Options that involve me selling my house and moving into senior housing so you won't have to worry about maintaining a relationship with an inconvenient elderly father. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a defensive edge that confirmed everything I suspected about his motivations. The house is too big for you, Pop. Ruth says you can't keep up with the maintenance, and you're isolated there with no family nearby. Senior communities offer social interaction and support services that would improve your quality of life. My quality of life would improve if my son treated me with respect and didn't abandon me at airports. I apologized for that. No, you made excuses. There's a difference. I pulled out the letter that Harrison had prepared and set it on the coffee table between us. The law firm's letterhead was clearly visible, along with the formal legal language that began the document. What's that? My new will. Marcus stared at the letter without touching it. Your new will? I spent this afternoon with an attorney making some changes to my estate planning. What kind of changes? The kind that ensure my money goes to people who will use it to help others rather than fund affairs and lifestyle inflation. Marcus picked up the letter with trembling hands and began to read. I watched his face change as he processed the contents, moving from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. You're leaving everything to charity?
I'm leaving everything to organizations that demonstrate the values I tried to teach you: compassion, service to others, respect for the vulnerable. And you're leaving me $1? I wanted to make it clear that this was intentional, not an oversight. Marcus set the letter down carefully, his face pale. Pop, you can't be serious about this. I'm completely serious. You've shown me that you see my death as a financial opportunity. I've decided to remove that opportunity. This is about yesterday, isn't it? You're punishing me because of one bad day. This is about discovering who you really are, Marcus. Yesterday just forced me to see what I'd been avoiding for years. What do you mean? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you visited Spokane? When was the last time you showed any interest in my life beyond what I could provide financially? Marcus struggled to answer, his silence confirming what we both knew. Our relationship had become entirely transactional, maintained through my financial contributions and his grudging acknowledgement of family obligations. I've been busy building my career. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. You care about what I can do for you. There's a difference. You're being unfair. I've always been grateful for your support. Have you? Because I gave you a $3,000 family heirloom this morning, and your first question was about its monetary value. I gave you a $12,000 watch that belonged to your grandfather, and you put it on without asking about its history or significance. Marcus glanced down at the Rolex on his wrist, his face reddening. I appreciate these gifts. You appreciate their worth. You don't appreciate their meaning. That's not true. What was the inscription on the watch? Marcus fumbled with the watch clasp, turning it over to read the back. To William Kellerman, 30 years of dedicated service. William was your grandfather. He worked at Boeing for 30 years, building airplanes that defended our country. That watch represents a lifetime of honest work and dedication to something larger than himself. Do you understand what that means? Of course I understand. Do you? Because honest work and dedication to something larger than yourself seem to be foreign concepts to you. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an expensive clock and the distant sound of traffic outside. Marcus stared at the legal letter, clearly trying to process the implications of what he just learned. Pop, please reconsider this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through them. We're family. Family doesn't abandon each other at airports. Family doesn't lie about work emergencies to cover up infidelity. Family doesn't conspire to manipulate elderly relatives into giving up their independence. I'll do better. I promise I'll be a better son. It's too late for promises, Marcus. Your actions have shown me who you are, and I've made my decisions accordingly. What about the house? Are you really going to sell it? I'm listing it next week. I'm moving to Arizona, where the climate is better and the cost of living is lower.
Arizona? But you don't know anyone there. I know Ruth, and I made some friends during my 6-month stay. More importantly, I'll be around people who choose to spend time with me rather than people who see me as an obligation. Marcus stood up and began pacing around the living room, his agitation obvious. This is crazy, Pop. You're making major life decisions based on one argument. I'm making major life decisions based on 42 unanswered phone calls and the realization that my son is more interested in my death than my life. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my health, my interests, my plans for the future? All of our conversations revolve around what you need or what Ruth thinks I should do. None of them focus on what I want. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me with something approaching desperation. What do you want, Pop? Tell me what you want, and I'll make it happen. I wanted a son who would treat me with respect. I wanted family relationships based on love rather than financial expectations. I wanted to pass down family heirlooms to someone who would treasure their history, not just their value. I can be that person. Can you? Because that would require you to fundamentally change who you are, and I don't think you're capable of that level of transformation.
Give me a chance to prove you wrong. I looked at Marcus standing in his expensive living room, wearing his grandfather's watch and preparing to take another man's woman out for an expensive dinner. Everything about him screamed success by conventional measures, but nothing about him suggested the character that real success required. I gave you 34 years of chances, Marcus. I worked overtime to pay for your education, contributed to your house purchase, supported your career choices, and overlooked your selfishness because I thought maturity would eventually teach you to value family over personal convenience. I do value family. You value what family can provide for you. When I'm no longer able to provide financial support, what exactly will our relationship be based on? Marcus couldn't answer the question, and his silence spoke louder than any words could have. We both knew that once my financial usefulness ended, so would his interest in maintaining contact. The changes to my will are final, I said quietly. The house will be sold next week. I'll be relocating to Arizona within the month. What about the money from the house sale? What about it? Where will that money go? Into accounts that will fund my retirement in Arizona. Why do you ask? Marcus's face flushed again. I just wondered if you'd considered setting aside something for family. You mean for you. I mean for emergencies, or if you need help with medical expenses or long-term care. If I need help with medical expenses, I'll use my own money. If I need long-term care, I'll arrange it myself. I won't be depending on a son who sees me as a burden. I don't see you as a burden. Then why were you and Ruth discussing ways to get me into assisted living? Because we're worried about you living alone in a big house. You're worried about the expense of maintaining a property that you're counting on inheriting. There's a difference. Marcus sat down heavily in one of his expensive chairs, the legal letter clutched in his hands. Pop, please don't do this. I know I've screwed up, but I can change. We can rebuild our relationship. Based on what? What do we have in common besides shared DNA and your expectation of financial inheritance? We're family. That should be enough. Family requires effort, Marcus. It requires attention and affection and genuine concern for each other's welfare. You've shown me that you're not willing to provide any of those things unless there's something in it for you. That's not fair. Fair would have been you picking me up from the airport when you promised to. Fair would have been honesty about your relationship status instead of lies about work emergencies. Fair would have been discussing your concerns about my living situation with me directly instead of conspiring behind my back. The clock in Marcus's living room chimed 7 times, reminding us that we'd missed our dinner reservation. Neither of us moved to acknowledge it. So, what happens now? Marcus asked finally. Now you live with the consequences of your choices. I move to Arizona, you continue your affair, and we both discover what our lives look like without the financial obligations that have defined our relationship. You're really going to cut me off completely? I'm going to stop enabling your selfishness and start living for myself. Marcus stared at the legal letter for a long time, clearly trying to absorb the reality of what had just happened. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed from desperation to something harder. Fine. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. But don't expect me to come running when you need help in Arizona. I wouldn't dream of asking. And don't expect me to visit or call or pretend to care about your new life. I don't expect anything from you anymore, Marcus. That's the point. He stood up abruptly and headed toward the stairs. I'm going out. Lock the door behind you when you leave. I'll be leaving first thing in the morning. Good. Marcus disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in his expensive living room with the legal documents that had just severed our financial relationship. A few minutes later, I heard his bedroom door slam, followed by the sound of drawers opening and closing as he prepared for whatever evening he'd planned. I gathered the legal papers and headed upstairs to pack my belongings. The guest room felt different now, less like temporary accommodation and more like the end of something that had been dying for years. I folded my clothes carefully and placed Helen's empty jewelry box in the suitcase beside them. Through the guest room window, I could see Marcus in the backyard, already changed into different clothes and preparing the hot tub for another evening of entertainment. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd quickly processed the afternoon's revelations and decided they didn't really matter. Maybe he was right. Maybe our relationship had been so hollowed out by mutual resentment and unmet expectations that its official ending would change very little. But at least now the pretense was over, and we could both stop performing roles that had become meaningless. I closed my suitcase and set it by the door, then sat in the reading chair to wait for morning. Outside, Seattle's lights began twinkling to life as the city settled into its evening rhythms. Somewhere in those lights were families sharing genuine affection, parents and children who had built relationships based on more than financial obligation and inheritance expectations. Marcus had made his choice when he left me sitting in an airport for 8 hours while he entertained his mistress. I'd made my choice this afternoon in a lawyer's office, surrounded by legal documents that would ensure my life's work benefited people who actually needed help rather than funding someone's lifestyle and moral compromises. The vintage Rolex was lost to me now, as were Helen's pearl earrings, but their monetary value would pale in comparison to the fortune Marcus had just sacrificed through his selfish behavior. $1.2 million, gone because he couldn't be bothered to treat his father with basic decency. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Spokane, list my house, and begin planning my relocation to Arizona's sunshine and honest warmth. Marcus would continue his affair and eventually discover what it felt like to build a life without his father's financial safety net. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.